Tom, an 8-year-old boy with a strong sense of right and wrong, always believed in protecting those he loved, no matter how hard it was. One day, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his father's life, Tom makes a decision that changes everything. As he watches his dad about to marry Diana, a woman who has been hiding dark secrets, Tom steps forward to reveal a shocking truth that no one could have imagined. His bold move stops the wedding in its tracks, but what happens next leaves everyone stunned. Why did Tom's revelation lead to such dramatic consequences? How did this young boy's courage uncover the truth about his father's fiancée? And what ripple effects did it have on their lives? Stay tuned to find out. And before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. If this story of bravery and honesty resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the small chapel, casting a warm glow on the assembled guests. The air buzzed with excitement as friends and family members chatted in hushed tones, their eyes darting expectantly towards the entrance. At the altar, John stood tall in his crisp black tuxedo, a nervous smile playing on his lips as he waited for his bride-to-be. "You look great, Dad," whispered 8-year-old Tom, fidgeting with a small pillow in his hands. The boy's dark curls were neatly combed, and his miniature suit matched his father's perfectly. But while John beamed with joy, Tom's brown eyes were clouded with worry. John glanced down at his son and gave him a reassuring wink. "Thanks, buddy. You're the best ring bearer a dad could ask for." He ruffled Tom's hair affectionately, oblivious to the anxiety etched across the child's face. As the first notes of the wedding march filled the air, the congregation rose to their feet, all eyes turning towards the chapel doors, eager to catch a glimpse of the bride. All eyes except Tom's. The boy's gaze remained fixed on his father, his small hands clutching the ring pillow so tightly his knuckles turned white. The doors swung open, revealing Diana in all her bridal glory. She glided down the aisle, a vision in white lace and silk. Her golden hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves, and her blue eyes sparkled with emotion. As she approached the altar, John's face lit up with pure adoration. "You look beautiful," John whispered as Diana took her place beside him. She smiled back, her voice barely audible. "I can't wait to start our life together." The officiant began the ceremony, his words washing over the attendees, but for Tom, each passing moment felt like an eternity. He shifted from foot to foot, his eyes darting between his father and Diana. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like simple nervousness, but there was something deeper, more urgent in the boy's demeanor. As he stood there, young Tom found himself lost in memories of the past few months. His mind drifted back to the day his father, John, first introduced him to Diana. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when John had picked Tom up from school, his face beaming with excitement. "I've got someone special I want you to meet, buddy," he had said, practically bouncing in his seat as they drove home. Tom remembered how his stomach had twisted with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Since his mother's passing 2 years ago, it had just been him and his dad. The thought of someone new entering their lives filled him with uncertainty. When they arrived home, Diana was waiting on the porch, her golden hair catching the late afternoon sunlight. She smiled warmly as they approached, and Tom couldn't help but notice how his father's eyes lit up at the sight of her. "Tom, this is Diana," John had said, his voice filled with pride. She's become very important to me, and I hope she'll become important to you too." Diana had knelt down to Tom's level, her blue eyes twinkling. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Tom," she'd said softly. "Your dad talks about you all the time." In that moment, Tom had felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. But as the weeks passed, that hope began to fade. Tom noticed how different Diana was when his father wasn't around. The warm smiles disappeared, replaced by cold stares and tight-lipped frowns. One particular evening stood out in Tom's mind. John had been working late, and Diana was supposed to watch Tom. As they sat at the dinner table, Tom tried to engage her in conversation. "Miss Diana," he'd started hesitantly, Do you like space? We're learning about the solar system in school and… Tom, Diana cut him off sharply, not looking up from her phone. I'm busy right now. Eat your dinner quietly, please. Tom had shrunk back in his chair, pushing his food around his plate. The silence that followed was deafening. When John was home, however, it was a different story entirely. Diana would ask Tom about school, laugh at his jokes, and even ruffle his hair affectionately. But Tom could see the falseness in her smile, the strain behind her eyes. John, on the other hand, was happier than Tom had seen him in years. He practically floated around the house, humming to himself and breaking into random bouts of dancing that would have embarrassed Tom if they weren't so nice to see. "Isn't Diana wonderful?" John would often say, his eyes twinkling. "We're so lucky to have her in our lives, aren't we, buddy?" Tom would nod and force a smile, not wanting to burst his father's bubble of happiness. But inside, he felt increasingly alone and confused. As the weeks turned into months, Diana's true nature became more apparent to Tom. She began to make subtle, cutting remarks when John wasn't within earshot. "Oh, Tom," she'd sigh at the mess he made while working on a school project. "You're such a handful. Sometimes I don't know how your father manages." Or when he'd excitedly show her a good grade on a test. "That's nice, dear, but you know there's always room for improvement." Each comment chipped away at Tom's self-esteem, making him feel like a burden in his own home. He began to withdraw, spending more time in his room and less time in the common areas of the house. One Saturday afternoon, about 3 months before the wedding, an incident occurred that Tom couldn't shake from his memory. John had gone out to run some errands, leaving Tom and Diana alone in the house. Tom was in the living room watching cartoons and sipping a glass of juice when Diana walked in. "Turn that off," she snapped, gesturing to the TV. "It's too loud, I'm trying to work." Startled, Tom fumbled with the remote. In his haste, he knocked over his glass, spilling juice all over the coffee table and carpet. "I'm sorry," he cried, jumping up to grab some napkins. "I didn't mean to." Before he could finish, Diana was there, her fingers digging into his arm as she yanked him away from the mess. "Look what you've done," she hissed, her face twisted with anger. "You clumsy, careless boy." Tom winced at her grip, tears springing to his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whimpered. "I'll clean it up, I promise." Diana's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You better," she growled. "And if you breathe a word of this to your father, you'll be very, very sorry. Do you understand me?" Tom nodded frantically, his heart pounding in his chest. As soon as Diana released him, he rushed to clean up the spill, his hands shaking the entire time. That night, when John returned home, Diana greeted him with a kiss and a cheerful, "How was your day, honey?" Tom watched from the stairs, rubbing his arm where Diana had grabbed him, feeling more alone than ever. As the wedding drew nearer, Tom found himself struggling with the weight of a secret. He wanted desperately to tell his father about Diana's true nature, but fear held him back. What if John didn't believe him? What if it made Diana even angrier? One evening, about a month before the wedding, Tom finally worked up the courage to approach his father. John was in his study, going over some paperwork when Tom knocked timidly on the door. "Come in, buddy," John called out, smiling as Tom entered. "What's up?" Tom hesitated, twisting the hem of his shirt in his hands. "Dad," he began slowly, "can I talk to you about something?" John set aside his papers, giving Tom his full attention. "Of course, son. You can talk to me about anything. What's on your mind?" Taking a deep breath, Tom blurted out, "It's about Diana. I don't think she likes me very much." John's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, Tom?" "Tom adores you, no, Dad," Tom said quickly, his words tumbling out in a rush. "She's different when you're not around. She ignores me and sometimes she says mean things." "Whoa, slow down," John interrupted, holding up a hand. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Tom, I know this is a big change for you. It's natural to feel a little unsure about Diana becoming a part of our family, but I promise you she cares about you very much." "But Dad," Tom tried again, but John shook his head. "No buts, buddy. Diana is going to be your stepmother, and I need you to give her a chance. She's trying her best, just like we all are. Tom's shoulders slumped in defeat. Okay, Dad, he mumbled, turning to leave the room. Hey, John called after him, his voice softening. I love you, kiddo. We're all gonna be just fine. You'll see. As Tom closed the door behind him, he felt a wave of hopelessness wash over him. His father, the person he trusted most in the world, hadn't believed him. Or worse, hadn't wanted to believe him. From that day on, Tom stopped trying to tell his father about Diana's behavior. Instead, he retreated further into himself, becoming quieter and more withdrawn. He began to dread family dinners and outings, knowing that he'd have to pretend everything was fine while silently enduring Diana's subtle jabs and cold shoulder. John, caught up in the whirlwind of wedding preparations and his own happiness, failed to notice the change in his son. He attributed Tom's quietness to shyness, or perhaps a phase, never suspecting the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Diana, for her part, seemed to revel in her victory, with John oblivious to her true nature and Tom too afraid to speak up again. She became bolder in her mistreatment of the boy. One afternoon, Tom overheard a conversation between Diana and her friend Sarah. I don't know how you do it, Sarah was saying. Playing mom to someone else's kid? I couldn't handle it. Tom froze in the hallway, holding his breath to hear Diana's response. Oh, it's not so bad, Diana replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Tom's, well, he's part of the package, isn't he? You have to take the good with the bad. Sarah laughed. You're a saint. I swear if it were me, I'd have shipped the kid off to boarding school by now. Tom didn't wait to hear Diana's response. He crept back to his room, his appetite forgotten, feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Part of the package? The bad? Was that all he was to Diana? An inconvenience she had to tolerate to be with his dad? As the wedding day approached, Tom felt increasingly trapped. He watched as his father and Diana made plans for their future, barely considering how it would affect him. When they discussed honeymoon destinations or redecorating the house, Tom felt like a ghost, invisible and unimportant. One night, Tom tossed and turned in his bed, unable to sleep. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked 11:42 p.m., its red glow casting eerie shadows across his room. Sighing, he decided to get a glass of water from the kitchen. As he padded down the hallway in his Superman pajamas, Tom froze. A hushed, angry voice drifted from the living room. It was Diana. Mark, you need to listen to me, she hissed into her phone. Tom crouched low, peering around the corner. Diana paced back and forth, her free hand raking through her disheveled blonde hair. We can't rush this. Everything has to be perfect. Tom's heart raced. He'd never heard Diana sound so agitated before. Usually, she was all smiles and sweetness, especially around his dad. The wedding is in 2 weeks, Diana continued, her voice dripping with frustration. Once that's done, we move on to phase 2. Yes, the insurance policy. John doesn't suspect a thing. Insurance policy? Phase 2? Tom's young mind swirled with confusion. He knew eavesdropping was wrong, but he couldn't tear himself away. Look, Mark, I've got it under control, Diana snapped. Just stick to the plan. Once we get the money, we'll be set for life. No more scams, no more close calls. This is our ticket out. Tom's breath caught in his throat. Money? Scams. What was Diana talking about? That brat Tom is the wild card, Diana growled, causing Tom to flinch. He's too observant for his own good, but don't worry, I can handle him. John is wrapped around my finger. He'd never believe a word against his precious fiancée. Tears pricked at Tom's eyes. He'd always known Diana didn't like him, but hearing her talk about him like this, it hurt more than he could have imagined. Just be ready, Diana said, her tone final. 2 weeks after the wedding, we strike. John won't know what hit him. With that, she ended the call. Tom scrambled back to his room, his heart pounding so loud he was sure Diana would hear it. He dove under his covers, his mind racing with what he had just overheard. Diana was planning something bad, and it involved his dad, money, and some kind of insurance policy. Tom didn't understand it all, but he knew one thing for certain. His father was in danger. Sleep eluded Tom that night. He tossed and turned, replaying Diana's words in his head. When morning came, he stumbled bleary-eyed to the breakfast table where John and Diana sat, the picture of domestic bliss. "Morning, champ," John said cheerfully, ruffling Tom's hair. "You look tired. Rough night?" Tom nodded, avoiding Diana's gaze. "Just couldn't sleep," he mumbled. Diana's saccharine voice cut through the air. "Oh, poor thing. Probably just excited about the wedding, aren't you, Tom?" Tom looked up, meeting Diana's eyes for a split second. He saw a flash of something cold and calculating behind her smile. It sent a shiver down his spine. "Yeah," he lied, forcing a smile. "Excited." Over the next few days, Tom watched Diana like a hawk. Now that he knew something was amiss, he started noticing things he'd overlooked before. Diana was constantly on her phone, typing furiously. Whenever John entered the room, she quickly locked the screen, plastering on a smile. "Just chatting with the wedding planner, honey," she'd say. Or, "Oh, you know, bridesmaid drama." But Tom knew better. He caught glimpses of her screen sometimes, rapid-fire texts to someone saved as M in her contacts. Mark, he assumed, the mysterious man from the phone call. Diana's absences from the house became more frequent too. She'd make flimsy excuses to leave, often for hours at a time. "Just popping out to finalize some wedding details," she'd chirp, kissing John on the cheek. Or, meeting the girls for a last-minute dress fitting. John, blinded by love and preoccupied with work, never questioned her. But Tom noticed. He noticed everything now. One afternoon, about a week before the wedding, Tom was helping John in the garage when Diana's car pulled into the driveway. She hurried inside, not even glancing their way. "I'm gonna get a snack, Dad," Tom said, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. John nodded, engrossed in fixing the lawnmower. "Sure thing, buddy. Bring me a soda while you're at it, will you?" Tom entered the house quietly, hearing Diana's muffled voice from upstairs. He crept up the stairs, careful to avoid the creaky third step. "Almost there, Mark," Diana was saying. She was in the guest room, soon to be hers and John's after the wedding. "Just a few more days. Keep your shirt on." Tom inched closer to the door, straining to hear. "The policy is ironclad," Diana continued. "Once we're married, it'll be easy. A tragic accident, a grieving widow, and we're set for life. Just stick to the plan." Tom's blood ran cold. A tragic accident? Were they planning to hurt his dad? Suddenly, Diana's voice dropped to a whisper. Tom leaned in, trying to catch her words. In his eagerness, he bumped against the door, causing it to creak slightly. The room went silent. Tom's heart leaped into his throat. "I've gotta go," Diana said quickly. "I'll call you later." Tom scrambled back down the hallway, ducking into the bathroom just as the guest room door opened. He heard Diana's footsteps pause outside the bathroom, then slowly descend the stairs. Breathing heavily, Tom slumped against the bathroom wall. This was worse than he'd imagined. Diana and this Mark person weren't just after money. They were planning to hurt his dad. Maybe even... Tom couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. He had to do something. But who would believe him? His dad thought Diana hung the moon, and Diana had made it clear that she could twist anything Tom said against him. For the next few days, Tom was on high alert. He watched Diana's every move, trying to piece together a plan. She was careful, but sometimes she slipped up. One evening, Tom walked into the study to find Diana hurriedly closing John's laptop. She jumped when she saw him, a guilty look flashing across her face. "Oh, Tom," she said, her voice overly bright. "You startled me. I was just checking some wedding RSVPs." Tom nodded, not believing a word. As soon as Diana left the room, he went to the laptop. It was locked, but Tom knew his dad's password. It was his birthday. The browser history had been cleared, but one tab remained open. A website for a major life insurance company. Tom's stomach churned. This must be the policy Diana kept mentioning. He was about to dig deeper when he heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, he closed the laptop and pretended to be looking at the bookshelf. John walked in, smiling when he saw Tom. "Hey, sport, what's up?" "Just looking for a book," Tom lied, hating how easy it was becoming to deceive his father. John ruffled his hair affectionately. "That's my boy, always with his nose in a book. Come on, dinner's ready." As they walked to the dining room, Tom's mind raced. He had to find a way to stop Diana, but how? The next day, Tom got his chance. John had a last-minute meeting at work, and Diana was out on one of her mysterious errands. Tom was alone in the house. With shaking hands, he opened Diana's sleek silver laptop. It was password protected, of course. Tom tried a few guesses, her birthday, the wedding date, but nothing worked. Just as he was about to give up, he noticed a yellow sticky note poking out from under the laptop. Peeling it back, he saw a string of numbers and letters. Could it be? Heart pounding, Tom typed in the code. The laptop sprang to life. Tom's eyes widened as he scrolled through Diana's files. There were dozens of documents with suspicious names, John's schedule, policy details. He clicked on one labeled insurance policy. A PDF opened, full of legal jargon, but a few phrases jumped out at him. Accidental death, double indemnity, payout of $5 million. $5 million. Was that what his dad's life was worth to Diana? Tom's hands shook as he continued searching. He found a folder labeled Mark and opened it. Inside were dozens of photos of a man he'd never seen before. Tall, dark-haired, with a scar above his left eyebrow. In some photos, he was alone. In others, he was with Diana, looking very much like a couple. Tom felt sick. Not only was Diana planning to hurt his dad, but she was cheating on him too. Suddenly, he heard a car in the driveway. Diana was back. In a panic, Tom closed all the windows and shut down the laptop. He had just managed to replace it exactly as he'd found it when the front door opened. "Tom?" Diana called. "Are you here?" "Yeah," he called back, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just doing homework." Diana appeared in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene in the study. "Don't you usually work in your room?" Tom shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "It's quieter here." Diana stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, don't work too hard. Dinner will be ready soon." As she turned to leave, Tom caught a glimpse of her phone screen. She was texting someone. The contact name was simply M. That night, as Tom lay in bed, his mind swirled with everything he'd discovered. Diana and Mark were planning to kill his dad for the insurance money. They were going to wait until after the wedding, then stage some kind of accident. Tom felt overwhelmed. He was just a kid. How was he supposed to stop two grown-ups from carrying out their evil plan? And with the wedding just days away, time was running out. He thought about telling his dad everything, but would John believe him? Diana had spent months painting Tom as a jealous, difficult child. Would his dad trust him over the woman he was about to marry? As he tossed and turned, Tom made a decision. He couldn't just sit back and let this happen. Somehow, some way, he had to stop this wedding. He had to save his dad. With that resolve, Tom finally drifted off to sleep. In his dreams, he saw Diana and the man from the photos, Mark, laughing over a grave, his father's grave. Tom woke up with a start, drenched in sweat. The dim light of dawn was just beginning to creep through his window. In that moment, as the remnants of his nightmare clung to him, Tom knew what he had to do. He would stop this wedding, no matter what it took. Now, back at the wedding, as the officiant began to speak, his words washed over Tom in a meaningless jumble. All he could focus on was the growing panic in his chest, the knowledge that he had to do something, say something, before it was too late. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The traditional words hung in the air. This was it. This was Tom's chance. But fear paralyzed him. What if he was wrong? What if no one believed him? What if he ruined everything for nothing? The officiant nodded, about to continue. Tom's heart pounded in his ears. It was now or never. Wait! The word burst from Tom's lips before he could stop it. Stop the wedding! A collective gasp rippled through the church. All eyes turned to Tom, who stood trembling, his small voice echoing in the sudden silence. Tom? John turned to his son, confusion and concern etched on his face. What's wrong, buddy? Tom's eyes darted from his father to Diana, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and barely concealed anger. Dad, Tom's voice quavered, but he pressed on. You can't marry her. She's not who you think she is. John knelt down, placing a gentle hand on Tom's shoulder. What are you talking about, son? Are you feeling okay? Tom shook his head vehemently. No, Dad, you don't understand. Diana, she's been lying to you. She's planning something bad. A murmur ran through the crowd. Diana let out a nervous laugh, her eyes darting between John and the guests. Oh, sweetie, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I know this is a big change for you. It's okay to feel scared about having a new mom, but this isn't the way to express it. Tom felt a surge of anger at her patronizing tone. No, he shouted. That's not it at all. I heard you on the phone with Mark. I know about the insurance policy. You're planning to hurt Dad. The church fell deathly silent. John's face went pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. Tom, that's a very serious accusation. Where did you hear such a thing? I overheard her, Dad, Tom pleaded. Late at night, she was talking to someone named Mark. They were talking about money and insurance and how they were going to get rid of you after the wedding. Diana's laugh was higher pitched now, a note of hysteria creeping in. John, honey, you can't possibly believe this. It's ridiculous. Mark is my wedding planner. Of course, we've been talking about insurance for the ceremony and money for the caterers and flowers. Tom must have misunderstood. But Tom wasn't backing down. No, that's not true. I saw the insurance policy on your computer. It was for millions of dollars if Dad dies. And I found pictures of you with Mark. He's not just your wedding planner. The crowd was in an uproar now, guests whispering furiously to each other, some looking scandalized, others concerned. John stood frozen, looking back and forth between his son and his bride-to-be. Diana's face had lost its color, her composed mask slipping. John, she said, reaching for his hand, you know me. You know I would never. This is absurd. Tom is just a child. He doesn't understand what he's saying. John's brow furrowed, clearly torn. Tom, he said slowly, these are very serious things you're saying. Are you absolutely sure about what you heard and saw? Tom nodded vigorously, tears welling in his eyes. I'm sure, Dad. I wouldn't lie about this. Diana's been mean to me for months, but only when you're not around. She makes me feel bad all the time. And now she's planning to hurt you. Please, Dad, you have to believe me. John's face was a storm of emotions, confusion, hurt, disbelief. He turned to Diana, his voice low and strained. Diana, is there any truth to this? Any at all? Diana's composure cracked. Her eyes darted around the church, taking in the shocked faces of the guests, the stern look of the officiant, the pleading eyes of Tom. For a moment, she looked like a cornered animal. Then, in a blink, her demeanor changed. These ridiculous accusations. I just lost my temper for a moment. Surely you can understand, Diana said, her voice trembling. But the damage was done. John took a step back, his eyes never leaving Diana's face. No, he said slowly. No, I don't think I can understand. Because the Diana I thought I knew would never speak to my son that way, no matter how upset she was. He turned to Tom, kneeling down to look his son in the eye. Tom, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. Don't leave anything out. And so, with all eyes upon him, Tom began to speak. He told his father about Diana's cold behavior when they were alone, the cruel comments and the physical intimidation. He recounted overhearing a phone conversation, the suspicious absences, the secret messages to Mark. He described finding the insurance policy on Diana's computer and the photos of her with Mark. As Tom spoke, John's face grew increasingly pale. The guests listened in stunned silence, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. Diana stood rigid, her eyes darting between John and the exit as Tom's story unfolded. Her composed facade crumbled completely. By the time he finished, she looked like a completely different person from the radiant bride who had walked down the aisle just minutes before. "Is this true?" John asked, his voice heavy with pain and betrayal. "Diana, look me in the eye and tell me none of this is true." Diana's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her eyes, once full of false warmth, now held only cold calculation. In that moment, John saw the truth, and it broke his heart. "I think," John said, his voice shaking slightly, "that this wedding is over." A commotion broke out in the church. Guests began to stand, some moving towards the exits, others crowding closer to hear what was happening. In the chaos, Diana saw her chance. With a snarl of frustration, she turned and bolted down the aisle, her white dress billowing behind her. She pushed past shocked guests, making a beeline for the church doors. "Stop her!" someone shouted, but Diana was quick. She burst through the doors and out into the bright sunlight, leaving behind a scene of utter chaos. The church erupted as she fled, her white dress billowing behind her like a ghostly apparition. John, still reeling from the shocking revelations, snapped into action. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. "Yes, hello. I need to report a crime," John said, his voice trembling. "My fiancée, she was planning to kill me for insurance money. She just ran from our wedding. Please, you need to find her." As John spoke to the dispatcher, providing Diana's description and last known direction, Tom stood rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the tumultuous events he had set in motion. A mix of relief and anxiety churned in his stomach. He had saved his father, but at what cost? The guests, a moment ago seated in reverent silence for a joyous occasion, now buzzed with shock and speculation. Some rushed outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fleeing bride. Others huddled in small groups, whispering furiously and casting furtive glances at John and Tom. John ended the call and turned to his son, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He knelt down, placing his hands on Tom's shoulders. "Tom," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you sooner. I should have seen." Tom threw his arms around his father's neck, burying his face in John's shoulder. "It's okay, Dad," he mumbled, his voice muffled. "I'm just glad you're safe." John hugged his son tightly, tears welling in his eyes. For a moment, the chaos around them faded away, and it was just father and son, united against the storm. Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of the police. 2 officers entered the church, their presence immediately commanding attention. The murmur of voices died down as everyone turned to watch. "Mr. Matthews," one of the officers asked, approaching John and Tom. John stood, keeping one hand on Tom's shoulder. "Yes, that's me. I'm Officer Johnson. This is my partner, Officer Rivera," the policeman said. "We need to ask you some questions about what happened here." As John began recounting the events to the officers, Tom's attention was drawn to a commotion near the church entrance. A tall man with dark hair and a scar above his left eyebrow was trying to push his way inside, looking frantic. Tom's heart leapt into his throat. He recognized the man from the photos he'd seen on Diana's computer. "Dad," Tom whispered urgently, tugging on John's sleeve. "Dad, that's him, that's Mark." John's head snapped up, following Tom's gaze. His eyes widened in recognition, remembering the description Tom had given earlier. "Officers," John said quickly, "that man by the door, I think he's involved in this. He's the one my son overheard Diana talking to on the phone." The officers reacted swiftly. Officer Johnson stayed with John and Tom while Officer Rivera moved quickly towards Mark, who was now trying to back out of the church. "Sir, stop right there," Officer Rivera called out. Mark froze for a split second, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Then, in a burst of panic, he turned and ran. Officer Rivera gave chase, shouting into his radio for backup. The wedding guests watched in stunned silence as the officer disappeared through the church doors in pursuit of the mysterious man. "Mr. Matthews," Officer Johnson said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I think it would be best if you and your son came down to the station to give a full statement. We'll need to gather all the evidence you have regarding Ms. Diana's plans." John nodded, still looking shell-shocked. "Of course, whatever you need." He turned to Tom. "Tom, buddy, are you okay to go with us to the police station?" Tom nodded bravely, though his heart was racing. "Yeah, Dad, I want to help." As they prepared to leave, John's best man, Jack, approached them. "John," he said, placing a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder, "what do you want us to do about all this?" He gestured vaguely at the church, full of confused and concerned guests. John ran a hand through his hair, looking overwhelmed. I don't know, Jack. I guess tell everyone to go home. Apologize on my behalf. I can't deal with this right now." Jack nodded understandingly. "Don't worry about it, man. I'll take care of everything here. You just focus on you and Tom, okay?" John managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Jack. I don't know what I'd do without you." As John and Tom left the church with Officer Johnson, they could hear Jack addressing the crowd, his voice steady and reassuring as he explained the situation and asked everyone to return home. "You seem so happy with her," Tom said softly, his voice barely a whisper. John's heart broke at his son's words. Without hesitation, he pulled Tom into a fierce hug, mindless of the awkward angle across the car seats. "Never, Tom," John murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You could never be the problem. You're the best thing in my life, and I'm so sorry if I ever made you doubt that." They sat there for a long moment, holding each other, letting the tears flow freely. It was a catharsis, washing away the pain and fear of the past months. Finally, John pulled back, wiping his eyes. "What do you say we go inside and order a ridiculous amount of pizza? I think we've earned it." Tom managed a small smile. "Can we get stuffed crust?" John laughed, the sound a bit watery but genuine. "Buddy, after today, you can have whatever kind of pizza you want." As they walked into the house, both John and Tom felt a weight lift from their shoulders. The specter of Diana still loomed in the background, but they would face that together. For now, they were home. They were safe, and they had each other. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. John and Tom's lives were turned upside down as they dealt with the aftermath of Diana's deception. There were more interviews with the police, meetings with lawyers to untangle the legal mess Diana had created, and endless calls from friends, family, and even reporters seeking details about the wedding day drama. John did his best to shield Tom from the worst of it, but there was no escaping the reality of their situation. Diana remained at large, seemingly having vanished into thin air. The police kept John updated on their search, but as the days turned into weeks, hope of finding her began to fade. Mark, on the other hand, was facing the full force of the law. In exchange for a plea deal, he provided a wealth of information about Diana's past cons and their network of associates. His testimony painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal operation that had been operating for years, leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts across the country. For Tom, the aftermath of the wedding day was a mix of relief and anxiety. He was glad his father was safe and that Diana was out of their lives, but he couldn't shake the fear that she might return someday to seek revenge. John noticed his son's unease and did his best to reassure him. He installed a new security system in their home, complete with cameras and motion sensors. He also made sure Tom knew he could come to him with any concerns, no matter how small they might seem. "We're a team, buddy," John would say, ruffling Tom's hair affectionately. "You and me against the world, remember?" Tom would nod, feeling a little bit safer each time his father reaffirmed their bond. As the weeks passed, life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. John threw himself into his work, taking on extra projects to keep his mind occupied. Tom focused on school, finding comfort in the familiar routine of classes and homework. One Saturday morning, about a month after the ill-fated wedding, John and Tom were having breakfast when the doorbell rang. John tensed, still wary of unexpected visitors, but relaxed when he saw Jack, his best man, through the peephole. "Hey man," Jack said as John opened the door. "How are you guys holding up?" John managed a tired smile. "We're hanging in there, come on in." Jack followed John to the kitchen, where Tom was finishing his cereal. "Hey, little man," Jack said, giving Tom a fist bump. "You doing okay?" Tom nodded, returning the fist bump with a small smile. He'd always liked Jack, who treated him like a person rather than just a kid. "So," Jack said, accepting a cup of coffee from John, "the guys and I have been talking, and we think it's time for you two to get out of the house for a bit. What do you say to a camping trip next weekend?" John hesitated, glancing at Tom. "I don't know, Jack. With everything that's happened." "That's exactly why you need this," Jack insisted. "Just a few days away from all this." He gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "No phones, no reporters, no lawyers. Just the guys, some tents, and the great outdoors." Tom perked up at the idea. "Can we go fishing?" he asked, a spark of excitement in his eyes that John hadn't seen in weeks. Jack grinned. "You bet, buddy. We'll catch enough fish to feed an army." John looked at his son's hopeful face and felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe this was exactly what they needed, a chance to breathe, to remember what life was like before Diana came into their world. "All right," he said, smiling as Tom's face lit up. "Let's do it." The camping trip turned out to be exactly what John and Tom needed. Away from the constant reminders of Diana's betrayal, they found themselves relaxing for the first time in months. They spent their days hiking, fishing, and swapping stories around the campfire. Tom delighted in learning how to set up a tent and roast the perfect marshmallow, while John rediscovered the simple joy of watching his son laugh and play without a care in the world. On their last night in the woods, as they sat around the dying embers of their campfire, John pulled Tom close. "Thank you, buddy," he said softly. Tom looked up at his father, confused. "For what, Dad?" John smiled, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "For being you. For being brave when I couldn't see what was happening. For saving us both." Tom snuggled closer to his father, feeling safe and loved. "We saved each other, Dad," he said wisely. As they drove home the next day, both John and Tom felt renewed. The shadow of Diana still loomed in the background, but it no longer seemed all-consuming. They had weathered the storm together and come out stronger for it. Life continued to move forward. Tom started a new school year, throwing himself into his studies and making new friends. John, with the encouragement of his therapist, began to cautiously dip his toes back into the dating pool, though he was understandably wary and took things very slowly. Then, 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, everything changed again. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Officer Johnson showed up at their door, his face grave. "Mr. Matthews," he said as John invited him in, "we found Diana." John's heart raced. "You've arrested her?" Officer Johnson shook his head. "No, sir. I'm afraid we found her body in a motel room just outside of Vegas. It appears she took her own life." The news hit John like a physical blow. He stumbled back, steadying himself against the wall. "She's dead?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Officer Johnson nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. We believe she'd been there for a few days." There was a note. At that moment, Tom came bounding down the stairs, stopping short when he saw the police officer. "Dad?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. John turned to his son, his face pale. "Tom, buddy, why don't you go to your room for a bit? I need to talk to Officer Johnson." Tom hesitated, his eyes darting between his father and the officer. "Is it about Diana?" he asked softly. John sighed, realizing there was no point in hiding the truth from his perceptive son. "Yes, it is. Come here, buddy. We should talk about this together." As they sat in the living room, Officer Johnson gently explained the situation, careful to spare Tom the more distressing details. Diana, or Sarah as she was truly named, had been on the run for months, always staying one step ahead of the law, but the pressure had taken its toll. In her note, Officer Johnson said, his voice softening, she expressed remorse for what she'd done. She said she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. John sat in stunned silence, his arm around Tom's shoulders. The boy looked up at his father, his young face etched with concern. "Are you okay, Dad?" John managed a weak smile. "I don't know, buddy. It's a lot to process." After Officer Johnson left, promising to keep them updated on any developments, John and Tom sat together on the couch, both lost in thought. Tom then asked, "Do you think she really felt bad about what she did?" John sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, buddy. People are complicated. Sometimes they do bad things and then regret them later. But what's important is that we learn from this and move forward." The news of Diana's death marked a turning point for John and Tom. While it brought a sense of closure, it also stirred up complex emotions that took time to process. They attended counseling sessions together, learning to navigate their feelings and strengthen their bond even further. As the months passed, life settled into a new normal. John threw himself into being the best father he could be, cherishing every moment with Tom. He also rekindled old friendships that had fallen by the wayside during his relationship with Diana, rebuilding his support network. Tom, for his part, blossomed. The weight of secrecy and fear lifted from his young shoulders. He became more outgoing at school and excelled in his studies. He developed a passion for detective novels,